It's the last European Council summit of the year, and how to handle COVID-19 remains firmly on the agenda. The rapid spread of the new Omicron variant was front and centre, with EU leaders wrangling over different approaches for how to stem the spread of the new variant. The Council has called on countries not to implement any restrictions that hamper the free movement of people between member states or those coming into the EU. And Shona Murray joins us now from there. Shona, good to see you. So EU leaders have agreed to coordinate efforts and ensure that COVID restrictions do not hamper free movement between member states and also travel into the EU. Can you tell us more about this agreement?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's part of what the conclusions were today, and it's something that we expected, was that there would be proper coordination amongst 27 member states as planned since the start of this pandemic to ensure that the right to freedom of movement would be maintained. We've seen some countries, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, having additional restrictions on people, essentially that they have to have tests coming into their countries regardless of vaccination status, and that seemed to go against the spirit of the COVID certificate, which allowed freer movement for people who were vaccinated. But of course there's an acknowledgement that the emergency brake system which these countries have applied is there in the cases of escape variants, and in particular where Italy is concerned, there was a bit of criticism against Italy for its move to not only just have negative PCR tests for people, but also requiring unvaccinated people to quarantine for 5 days because they didn't talk to the Commission about it. But I think that there really is a consensus that all 27 member states want to keep the COVID certificate operating. They also agreed that they should really ramp up efforts to tackle disinformation, misinformation and vaccine hesitancy, because this is what's going to get us out of this situation.
Shona, you of course mentioned all those countries there that have of course ramped up their restrictions. So are they now going to dial those back? For example, Italy, especially France and Portugal?
No, I don't think that's what's going to happen because, I mean, when you look at Omicron and the fact that it's spreading so rapidly, even though there's a lot we still don't know about that variant, the idea that they would resile from their positions in relation to protecting their countries. We know that the Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, made the point that 135,000 people died in Italy because of COVID, and so his responsibility to them is very important. So restrictions will be maintained. In fact, I'd say what you might even have member states applying such restrictions to their entries as well, that you'd have to have a negative PCR test regardless of vaccination, because we know that Omicron spreads quite fastly. So I think that we'll just have to see what happens in the next few weeks regarding Omicron, because it'll be a while before we know the full data. We know exactly what this variant means.
Definitely. And what about then with Russia further sanctions? Has COVID just taken over the agenda of the EU Leader Summit?
No, the COVID part was very much earlier in the day, but it did go on much longer than had been expected, which is kind of unsurprising. But the EU leaders are pretty much now talking about Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, they were told to keep their phones outside the room because of the nature of it, the high security nature of a discussion like this. There isn't expected to be a full resolution or an agreement about what type of response the EU would have in the case of Russia invading Ukraine. Although we know that they're taking it very seriously, the consensus is that the response would have to be very strenuous in the form of deep and wide sanctions. It wouldn't obviously be a military response, that would be down to NATO. But certainly there is fear that that is what is on the mind of Vladimir Putin, although some countries, in particular Mario Draghi, says he doesn't see that Putin is ready to do that. Nonetheless, the EU leaders are discussing what the response should be, and it is quite top secret and quite unknown at this point. Mariam?